I think there is a title, Together We Grow. That's too long, so I'm just sticking with the word together. And we have the Bible reading from the book of Hebrews. In case you don't know much about the book of Hebrews, then it's a very early document written by a Jewish Christian. Let's call him a scholar. He knew his stuff. To Jewish Christians in another city, I think quite possibly Rome myself. And in the letter he explains the foundations of the faith that they share and encourages them not to give up on the faith or its practice. So from today's reading, I picked the last 3 verses, and I'll read them again to you. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together. There's your word, together. As some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. You would have noticed that he writes in quite a dense way, with lots of words of some complexity floating around. Now, I'm always interested in clusters of words, not necessarily in individual words, but I've selected a cluster of 3 words out of these last 3 verses. The words are hope, faithful, and encourage. I want you now to use your imagination. I want you to think of a complicated road junction. The one I've got in mind is the one down in Canning Town, at the roundabout near the station there. That's complicated, isn't it, really? You get roads of various sorts coming into it. From our verse, which we're looking at, I'm going to imagine naming 3 roads coming into such a roundabout as just lost this, I'm so sorry. Well, the words will be faithful and hope and encouraging one another. So that's a roundabout with the rows that gather around it. Now think of ourselves perhaps as a roundabout. We're a church meeting and we're here, and you dealt with some of the complexities of coming to church. You got dressed, you had your breakfast, I hope, you got here on time, and all these things are wonderful. Not very complicated, but things you must get done. But actually, I think that inside a church meeting, there are a number of other things going on which we don't see quite so simply. And those 3 words of hope and encourage, and the third one, God's faithfulness, these are like ideas which are circulating around us. And we do very well to be mindful of them when we get together. So together we want to profess our hope, we want to rest on God's faithfulness, and we want to encourage one another. These are the sorts of things which are affecting us and we are getting involved with as we meet together. You've got the 3 words? They are God's faithfulness, professing our hope, and encouraging one another. So what do we do in the activities when we meet together as a church? We profess our hope through creeds and songs. We hear of God's faithfulness when we take communion, when we read the Bible, and hear each other's stories. And sometimes those stories are acted out by a baptism. And we encourage one another to persevere in our faith and mission through sermons, prayers, the offering, and personal talk with one another. So it's becoming a little bit more complicated, but at the same time, it's becoming ever more wonderful as to the sort of things that are going on and we can benefit from when we meet together. Now, as to hope, each of us can have hope individually in Jesus Christ. As to God's faithfulness, we can and we do trust in God's faithfulness individually. But when it comes to encouraging one another, it seems to me this is what we do as a group. You need somebody else to be there. It's not only a question of between you and the Lord, it's about other people as well. So this gets me to, in my view, a really important part of why we gather together, whether it's in this room or on Zoom. Why do we do it? In part, but a significant part, we do it for one another. Have you ever thought about that? Sometimes you might think, I go to church for what I can get out of it. That's all very good. But part of the reason why we gather together is so that we can encourage other people. This is an opportunity for you to be an encouragement to other people. So we're here to give as well as to receive. An important part of why we are here, it's for all the other people who are here. So do take a look around the room. You can do it. Here are the other people and the folks on Zoom as well. Can't see their faces, I don't think, but hopefully they are all part of seeing one another. We are here in part for one another and with the specific purpose of encouraging one another. And it's not only to be done through the formalities of the service, it takes place afterwards as well. We want to encourage one another. So one of the big questions is, as we look around the room, how can I give encouragement to one or more of these people in their Christian faith and in their love and good works? It's great in this room. This is a fantastic opportunity. I must say, I do feel a little bit woozy this morning because I had to get up early because I was invited to do a sermon, 7 o'clock in the morning. Can you believe that? 7 o'clock in the morning, which was zoomed to a small church in Pakistan. That's an extraordinary thing, isn't it? I could say to myself, oh my goodness, I looked at the people who were gathered together there. It was an encouragement, especially the little children at the front all staring at the screen. And I had my opportunity to try and give some encouragement to them as well. Zoom actually broadens some things. And this really came home to me. I'm going to go off script now for a minute. I was watching a Reformed synagogue service a few weeks ago from Bromley, not so far from here, and I got into this thing, and because I quite like to listen to what they do in terms of their annual cycle of things, and also about what style of sermons would you hear in a Reformed synagogue. Well, I was stunned. On this particular Saturday, the service was led by a rabbi, not in Bromley, but in Moscow. And those who joined in the service were not in Moscow, of course. They were in Bromley, so some of the local people and somebody with, good English, Russian man, very far away, was leading them as they worked their way through the service and gave a little sermon as well. Sometimes I wonder if, we could be missing a little trick on this, basically. What a wonderful way in terms of spreading out the issue of encouragement, and we can do that in this room really very well. But also the folks, through Zoom, have the opportunity also of taking part in this work of encouragement. So together, by whatever means, we receive encouragement from one another and we give encouragement. So what are the details? How do we do that? Well, first of all, by our presence here. It's a different thing, if only you and one other person had come to church this morning, you would have encouragement, but in a small measure. But the more of us who gather, the more faces we see, the more people that we remember, the more of an encouragement it is. You know, when you say, I'm not alone in this thing, that's an encouragement, isn't it? Second thing is that when we gather together, we take part in worship, and part of that is through whatever songs we sing, we express the hope that we have in our hearts. This is an encouragement personally and also to other people. Thirdly, that when we get together, and today was a good example of it, we can remember our mission of love and good works, as it's mentioned in the book of Hebrews. And today, of course, we're remembering Climate Sunday. We had a presentation, and in a sense, we remember and we encourage one another to do those things to do with improving the environment around us, both for ourselves and for other people too. And finally, by our words. Words carefully spoken, sensitively done, can be a real encouragement to anybody to whom you are speaking. This is a great thing about being together. Now, speaking of words, this is my link on this. I'm interested in verse 25, when the term "the day" was read out to us, and it comes in this sentence: "And all the more as you see the day approaching." So maybe this is to do with all those things of hope and faithfulness, but very especially, sometimes it's really important to grab the opportunities to encourage one another in mission. So the day. Now here's an example of when I just really wish that the author had written a bit more. And the temptation it always is, firstly to Bible translators and secondly to preachers, is to fill in the gaps, which you might do well or you might do badly. The day is really important because it seems to give an additional impetus to us in our Christian behaviour. So one or two options here. The NIV, which was up on the screen for us, it took the word day and added something to it. It added a capital D to it. Okay? Didn't need to do that, but it's quite common in Bible translations to make it the day. We still don't know how to identify the day, but the tendency might be for you, as it is for me, in thinking about what that day might mean, it could be perhaps the day of the Lord's coming. And whether that day comes with that apparent suddenness of an apocalypse about which we read elsewhere in the New Testament. Maybe. But if we read that phrase in a more everyday sense, the day approaching, and I try not to think too theologically about that, the day approaching is what? It's the pre-dawn. The day is the daytime as opposed to the night. And between the two, there's not that sort of abruptness, lights on and lights off business. There is a small and gradual increase in the light until the day comes and the sun is risen. So the light increases as it comes from the east, and I like the poetry of this kind of simple and everyday reading of it. Once there was darkness, and the darkness has not entirely gone in the pre-dawn, but it is going. The pre-dawn is a token of a new day coming. And maybe in theological language, this is the overlap between our present world in which we live and in the world to come, as these two things overlap in that kind of twilight. And you can take a concept like this. The night is not permanent, the day is coming, and you see a token of the day in the pre-dawn light. Whatever pressures these Hebrew Christians were going through, and there were some, and these pressures were disheartening them from their faith and from their practice of the Christian religion. All of that kind of disheartening aspect is a kind of a darkness. The thing to remember is that those disheartening aspects which they were going through were not the end of the story. They were not permanent. And the evidence of it is that there is a new day approaching. The Jewish Christians, if they could see it, then might consider that they were on the right side of history. Their hope in Jesus would not be a letdown, but it would be fulfilled because God is faithful to them and also to us. And on that basis, because the hope is bright, they could encourage one another in their difficulties, not simply by commiserating one another, but because of God's faithfulness, they could say, a better day is coming. And so what a wonderful thing it is to be a messenger of that hope in words of encouragement to one another. And of course, many people both have been and are currently going through great difficulties. But the proposal here is that that is not the end of the story. There is a better day and a better time which is coming. And maybe the advice is, although there are darknesses, they are passing, and we can also focus on the coming light. So they shouldn't give up. Don't give up on the faith and the practice, which was the tendency because things were difficult for these Christians. And now I come to the title of this little talk, which I forgot to give you earlier in my confusion. In crude modern language, the phrase is, don't get off the train while it's in the tunnel. That's it. Don't get off the train while it's in the tunnel. Don't abandon the faith because things are difficult. And in all of this, our eyes are placed upon the future, on the coming day. And not about giving up, but on going forward, not about despair, but about hope. May this meeting be a kind of source of encouragement, one to another. It is God's faithfulness to fulfill his promises, which gives us a sense of hope in the future, even in the midst of our daily ups and downs in our own lives, and also in the life of our church. Hope itself is the reason why we should continue to meet together. This concept of a future hope, it's more than just a mindset, a pack of ideas. It works its way out in actions. Here it says, expressed by love and good deeds. On this Climate Sunday, we have reason to encourage one another to act responsibly and more responsibly in our world. Think in Clive's notes, perhaps not in Clive's notes, but somewhere, perhaps on the notice sheet, there was the concept of love of God's creation. It said it's part of God's plan for humans to look after the earth, loving God, loving his creation, loving all people. We are involved in this mission together. So let's go back to Canning Town and to that jolly roundabout. I've tried to say that if you could imagine that we are meeting in the midst of that roundabout, sounds like a horror story, doesn't it, basically? We're meeting in that roundabout, and round us are circulating, meeting and merging are these three words. Our hope, God's faithfulness, and encouraging one another to love and good deeds. These things are converging, basically, as Christians meet together, as we meet together. And it just encourages us to lift our eyes from the day-to-day mundane nature of what seems to be a church service, and is a church service, to say, okay, there are very powerful forces at work here and around us. We can move beyond the details of worship to the dynamics of worship. And while we are here, let us remember this hope, God's faithfulness, and encouraging one another. And so finally, if we can encourage one another when we meet together, it means that we, each of us, can then go with a greater sense of positivity to those front lines about which LICC encourages us. So when you go out from this short meeting here and you go back to your homes and to your work, to your family and to your neighbourhood, you can do that with more positivity because we have been encouraged while we are here. So there you can have more confidence, you can make a better contribution, and this wonderful sense of being commissioned. We've been prayed for, we've been encouraged as we meet together. And that, with all of its flaws, is the end of the talk. And I hope, in a sense, that will give a good theme for us both for now and to the folks on Zoom as well, and both now and as we go to our different parts of our lives, Monday to Saturday too.